This is the Powered Up Podcast, show 162.
Form an alliance with their parents and their caregivers. If I do not do that first and foremost, I fail every single time. And so I think reaching out to them even before the first day of school, sharing your contact information and loading them up on that asset-based approach rather than deficit-based, like telling them how wonderful their child is at X, Y, and Z.
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Kennerman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I'm here with my co-host, Mr. Matt, 1/6 of our guest, Rogers.
1/6? What in the world?
She alludes to her status as a mother, our guest, and you know, the awaiting of baby Rogers. So I think our guests will get a chuckle out of that a little bit later in the show. We had an awesome conversation tonight. Yeah. One of those moments for us, definitely.
It is definitely going to be saved for me. I wanted to bring this up and I didn't. She had the opportunity I thought was interesting in her introduction, not to spoil the first few moments, but in Florida, the ability to take a sabbatical and go around and really meet educators across the state, but also advocate for educators. And one of the things that I wish that I had asked was, how do you feel like the observation of good, bad, and ugly across the state of Florida influenced how you came back to the classroom even after you've been nominated? Because I would imagine we were saying, and at one point we talk about how we could support educators in different roles, them going and seeing out their great educators, or even not necessarily great educators. How beneficial someone that you knew used that time so productively came back, you know, fired up, ready to go, ready to make a difference. And she is an incredible human being and just a gift to education. I cannot wait for you guys to get into this episode. It has the potential of career changing.
I couldn't agree more. And our conversation was so rich and we had so much depth that I can't wait to go back and edit it just to remember and recall everything that we talked about, because sometimes I feel like our conversations, we get to know our guests and then we reach a level of depth that you and I are proud of. And that's what we love to do on this podcast. I've had people ask me, you know, have you ever thought about doing 20-minute episodes? And my answer is no. One, because I enjoy long form podcasts. So that's kind of the route I went when we started this. But I said the most important thing to me is that we reach a level of depth that is valuable and we're not just scratching the surface of conversations. And I just felt like we were in depth mode the whole conversation. And I think that just speaks volumes about the guest that we had on tonight, Sarah Painter. She's just a great teacher. She's a great person. And there's so much that we talk about that can enrich ourselves as educators, as human beings, and as instructional leaders in our building and in our classrooms. And like you said, Matt, I really can't wait to just jump right into this conversation so our guests can hear from Sarah. So we will check in with Teach Better, and then we'll jump right into our conversation with Sarah Painter.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. You can find out more at teachbetter.com/podcasts. Now let's get back to the episode.
Hi, Sarah. Welcome to the Powered Up Podcast. How you doing tonight?
Hi, Ken. Thanks for having me. I'm doing wonderful.
Excellent. I'm really excited for this conversation. I know we've been setting it up for a little while, and we have some familiar colleagues through your experiences in education. So, kick things off for us, nice and simple. Please officially introduce yourself. Let us know where you are coming from, and please give us a snapshot of your career in education.
Absolutely. My name is Sarah Painter. I am an MTSS coach currently, which is a multi-tiered systems of support coach here in Pinellas County in Florida. And prior to that, I was a fifth grade teacher. And during my years as a fifth grade teacher, I was named the 2022 Florida Teacher of the Year. I have spent my last 6 years in the classroom were in fifth grade, which is my heart. I saw a little fist pump there, Ken. There is nothing like being a fifth grade teacher. There is something magical about it. I also spent 8 years prior to that in fourth grade, and prior to that, 5 years in third grade. And I felt like every time I went up in a grade, I was like, okay, this is the sweet spot, right? This is it. Like, not only are they a little bit older and can do a little bit more, but they start to get my jokes. And by fifth grade, we spoke in sarcasm in my classroom. So it was just perfect, not only for them, but for me. And so after the Florida Department of Education grants their Teacher of the Year a sabbatical for an entire year. So once I was named the Teacher of the Year, I spent a year traveling my state and speaking about the importance of education and advocating for this wonderful profession. But it was during those travels that I saw the need for my colleagues to be supported. And so while my heart has always been with students, I know that we can't be the best for students if we're not supporting teachers. And so my role kind of shifted, and I decided to not step away from the classroom, but step out of the classroom and step into the classrooms of my colleagues. And so with that being said, I am in my second year now as an instructional coach at the school that I've been at for 16 years. And it's one of the most fulfilling things I have ever done, most frightening, but also most fulfilling.
Matt, you can just sign off now if you want.
Sarah, I'm offering the same thing to you. You know, I moved from fourth to fifth grade. You know,
I'm a former fifth grade teacher. My heart is in fifth grade for sure. Yes. Matt was fourth grade for a long, long time. He's in fifth for his first year. And I think maybe his opinion will switch in a couple of years. We've had battles about fourth and fifth, and I'm an instructional coach now. So
look at that.
we've definitely gone on similar paths. You are much more successful in the sense that I was nominated for Teacher of the Year in Pennsylvania as a fifth grade teacher, but my nomination stopped at the finalist portion of that circuit. So,
and I'm not even nominated. So I'll take the night off. That's fine.
So as an instructional coach, what has been your biggest challenge to overcome in that role, in the sense of it being a new experience where you haven't had the opportunity to coach teachers before? What was that first big hurdle that you felt you had to overcome as a coach?
Sure. I would say it was becoming familiar with the primary grades. I had spent so many years, 21 years now, in third, fourth, and fifth grade. And most fifth grade teachers are frightened of ever even thinking of teaching kindergarten. And the same is true of kindergarten teachers. They're frightened of being in fifth grade. And I regret not taking that risk and trying it. And so I think my biggest hurdle in the beginning was not feeling like an imposter, and knowing that just as teachers can teach different grade levels because the skill set is basically the same, I had the skill set already required to coach my peers. I just needed to get out of my own way. And so I did that by inundating myself in those grade levels. And so I volunteer now to be the administrator, if you will, that walks through kindergarten and first grade. Because how else am I going to learn about it? I can't just brush it off to somebody else. I want to see what that's like. And what's interesting, Ken and Matt, is kids are kids. And the same thing I'm doing in my fifth grade classroom is happening in kindergarten. They are turning and talking. They're coming to the carpet. They are learning little gimmicks and little tricks for math and for reading and for science. And I just, at the end of the day, go, kids are kids. Like, this is amazing. I could do it. I know I could, but more than that, I have so much to learn from my colleagues. So I just love when I meet a challenge to say that I know the experts that I can leverage to help me grow professionally. And so I've kind of taken that challenge over the last 2 years.
So looking at that, I think I've never been in that role. I've only ever been in the classroom joyfully, and I've never left the classroom on purpose. I've had opportunities, but I would imagine one of the biggest transitions is not telling people how you did it, because no one.
Oh, wait, I'm not supposed to be doing that?
Well, yeah, exactly. But like, I think what we often hear is someone that's new in a position that's different than a classroom teacher is. Oh, so great. That's how your classroom functions. My classroom's different.
Right.
And what did you guys feel? We often talk about kids and their soft skills. What are some of the soft skills that you had to acquire? Because I imagine listening became maybe not more important. Like, listening was always important for your interaction with kids, but how did you develop soft skills that may be less obvious, that you felt like were really the bridges connecting you to your educators? Because the trust between you and your peer is probably in need of being even stronger.
Absolutely.
Than what we would expect with students. So what went into it from that end that allowed it to be as successful as when you were in the classroom?
Good question, Matt. You know, I think it's that relationship building, right? We know that good teachers always talk about that the relationships have to be built first. I was in an interesting position because these are my colleagues I've worked with for the last few years. So we had the relationship, but it was definitely a different relationship. So then in the classroom, we create intentional questioning, right? Like, we make sure we are planning to get the responses that we want from students. And so I started to have to build in some intentional questioning for my colleagues. And I had to say when I didn't know something, just like I did in front of my students. And that builds trust, because now they see this is not someone, like you said, Matt, coming in telling me how to do my job or how it looks in her room. This is someone who's actually here to listen. And then we do the monitoring with feedback in our classroom. And as an instructional coach, I'm monitoring with feedback. I am putting myself in their rooms at several different times of the day to see how that room runs, because I know when an administrator only came in my room for an evaluation, I felt, well, they don't know my room. They don't know how this runs. So I want to counter that by making sure I'm present and I'm watching transitions. I'm watching content. I'm watching morning circle. I watch the way they greet. I watch the way they dismiss. And so just kind of giving that full picture of my colleagues and the teachers on my campus to make sure I truly know who they are. And when I don't, that I ask the questions.
I think that's one of the biggest keys as an instructional coach is those question pieces, and doing it from a position of curiosity and learning. When I moved into coaching, I moved into secondary. So I was in the same district. Some of the teachers knew who I was just from the fifth graders moving up to one of our middle schools. But for the most part, I didn't really have relationships with those teachers. And one of my biggest mistakes that I made as a coach, and that I always, when I meet with new coaches, I always recommend is your job is not to be a problem solver. Your job is to be a question asker. And I tried to solve too many problems. That's part of my personality, but also it was a little bit trying to prove myself. And when you talked about teaching kindergarten and just getting in there and just trying it, I think that's one of the best gifts that we can offer as coaches, or even peer to peer. You don't have instructional coaches in your district, or you're not a coach yourself, and you have the opportunity for peer coaching. Maybe it's part of your evaluation cycle. I know a lot of districts operate that way. Just creating the opportunity for you to watch your colleagues and your colleagues to watch you. The first time I taught a kindergarten lesson was when I was consulting with another district who was paying me to be there, and I did professional development and followed it up with embedded coaching. And the kindergarten teachers wanted to see me put into action what I had presented in the professional development. And I mean, I was very, very nervous, and there's a lot of things that didn't go great in the lesson, but I was I was going with a lens of trying to offer them something to reflect and think about, even if it was designed in a way that wasn't great or was great. And it wasn't a conversation of them saying like, yeah, you see, I knew you couldn't do it as good as you said you could. It was a conversation around, I really liked observing that. I really like how you modeled that skill or how you interacted with that student. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts we can offer teachers, is just the opportunity to watch other people teach.
And the
And
authenticity that that brings, right? Like that's the
mm,
unscripted part. This is the moment that things are happening right now. It's that with itness that you have or you don't have, and that ability to pivot and think on your feet, but to also watch when people struggle with that, because God forbid we admit that we don't have it all down, right? And I think as an instructional coach, and you'll probably agree with this, I'm using these experiences where I am modeling or watching teachers teach to create a bank of expertise in my building, so that when I am speaking to the fourth grade teachers and they're talking about routines, and I say, go down to Miss Ariadne's class in kindergarten, and I want you to go watch the way those 5-year-olds knew what to do on day 10 of school this year when I had to go cover so she could go give a test one-on-one. I mean, I was terrified. I walked in this room and I was told to just, they'll know what to do. And I'm like, they're 5. It is literally the 10th day of school. And the kids were like, well, Miss Painter, first we get our bags out and we make our names, and we make them with our magnetic letters, and then we mix them, and then we don't mix them with our friends, and then we fix our names, and then we mix them again. And after that, we write. I mean, they had it down to a T. And I'm like, I couldn't do that with 10-year-olds. And somewhere we lose that autonomy with our students, where we start to tighten up the older they get. And we forget how capable they are. So when I get to go into classrooms, I'm building a bank of expertise around my campus so that I can highlight the success that is happening, that we don't get opportunities, like you said. We don't get those opportunities to go into our colleagues' classrooms. And so I think that's part of my job too, is to shine a light on the good things that are happening, because we can never hear too much about that.
So just and I want both of you to answer this question. Do you feel like you, like, at least locally, and I would imagine Sarah in Florida as well, you're not considered admin, but you almost do what a principal would love to do most,
Yes.
but never has the time to do?
Yes.
Like, I think that's where I view, at least from instructional support and MTSS. MTSS has some features, and I think we should unpack those too, just to go down that route eventually. But when it looks at it, it's the idea of, you can come in my classroom and I know that nothing about my career is in jeopardy.
Absolutely.
But I can completely trust, and obviously I want to get feedback, but I know that if I bomb, it's okay. And not that I'm going to, but that pressure coming off. And Ken, I'd love to hear from you, because I mean, right now you've kind of transitioned roles temporarily, that you weren't admin and now you're stepping in temporarily as admin. Does that change your interactions? Because there's a portion that, when I am very favorable of my administration, like they do great by us, but there is still, I've been doing this 15 years. There's still, sweat that I try to hide when they show up
100%.
in my
Yes.
door.
Anytime. Yep. Well, Ken, go ahead.
And so
I'll let you answer that
It's got to be
first.
liberating, by all means.
okay, looks good. I'll just start my answer over. So to offer clarity to what Matt is saying, is I'm currently serving as an elementary interim principal in my district, and the principal will be returning at some point, but it is a position that I'm officially holding right now, and I will be doing observations. I will be doing that administrative side, and it's interesting for multiple reasons. One, I will go back to being a coach. I'm technically a secondary coach, so I mostly work in our secondary schools. I get pulled to elementary once in a while, and our positions constantly shift as personnel shifts. I'm in a building that I had the least amount of relationships in out of probably almost all of our buildings, just because it wasn't one of the elementary buildings I worked in before. And I think I've quickly established a good level of trust with the teachers. I think they appreciate me being there, appreciate me just stepping in out when it came out of the blue. But now that they know I'm doing observations, it will be interesting, right? And my goal is to focus solely on coaching, right? I mean, it's not about the evaluation, and I don't think observations ever really should be about that. I think the evaluation serves as an opportunity to highlight where a teacher is strong and where you see the opportunity for growth. And like you said, Matt, coaching is that piece that hopefully principals want to do most. They want to be that instructional leader most. And I think the role of coaching has definitely grown in my eyes in what I've seen in surrounding areas. And I think that's for multiple reasons. I think one is the role of the administrator has, we talk as teachers, they just keep putting more and more and more on our plate. And that is true, but they're also doing it to administrators. And I think it's becoming more and more difficult for administrators to be instructional leaders, even just from a time perspective in their classroom. And our administrators are very supportive of us as coaches and very often say that they can't survive without the coaches, because we are in classrooms constantly supporting teachers, really focusing on the new teachers. And like you said, Matt, that piece of the evaluation is gone. And I can even see it in this interim position. The reaction I get when I walk into a classroom is different. It's still different, even though I don't really view myself as an administrator, right? I'm just there to support the teachers and support the students and support the families. That's what I keep describing my role as. But I'm going to do evaluations for the mere fact of I don't want the principal to come back to a mountain of work that she has to accomplish in a short amount of time. But like you said, Matt, the reaction is different because they know I'm technically an administrator.
So I think you're absolutely right that the value that I can add as an MTSS coach and instructional coach on campus is that I'm not evaluative, and our teachers are hungry for that authentic feedback. And I think that they're willing to take risks with me because I'm evaluating them at the end of the year on their instruction. And so they value specifically what I'm seeing in that moment. And it feels authentic and it feels actionable. They can take something is this something that I'm supposed to be doing within my grade level context, right? Is this something that my evaluator is looking for here? Like, this would be a good strategy.
And you used a word that I think is, the key there. You talked about risk. If I'm trying something at a risk, right now, Ken, you can tell me that I can try something risky. I don't want to try something risky for you. I want to try something vanilla as I can get, as controlled as can get. Exactly, right? Like, because that's the nature of I need this to represent the flow of my classroom in a light version that is as controlled as possible, while saying, we're in Pleasantville, but Sarah, you want me to try and see if I can dangle from the ceiling. I'm willing to try it. And it's and that's a responsibility too, right? Like, you guys have the probably biggest influence at the health of teachers and their representation of teaching curriculum. And hopefully you don't feel it as a pressure.
I think great administrators can accomplish that, and they can get to a point where teachers will view them as pretty close to being an instructional coach for the building. And it comes with their expertise as instructional leaders and their ability to build trust with the teachers and how they handle professional development, how they handle faculty meetings, how they handle evaluations with teachers. As a coach, that trust factor happens a lot faster. As a coach, you have to establish trust and rapport with the teacher as a person. But I mean, I've worked with teachers, and the first time I'm in their classroom, the first thing they say to me when students leave is, "Tell me everything I did wrong." And that's not what I'm there to do. And I never say like, "Oh, here's what you did." Like I spin the conversation immediately, but that's not something that you would say to an administrator that was in your room, right? So that element is different there, but I think great administrators can create that rapport with teachers pretty close to it, and it and I've worked for one like that, right? So I know what that can feel like, but it's still different than a coach. And I think teachers listening, if you don't have coaches in your district, find ways to collaborate with your colleagues. Reach out to your administrators and say, can we arrange for some sort of coverage on this specific day or once in a while where we can we request a sub on Tuesdays when we typically don't have call outs, and can this sub cover 5 different classes so 5 of us can watch someone else teach for 20 minutes, right? That
All right, I got to ask a question before we transition to anything else. I'm in a scenario and I want both of your honest feedbacks. You're witnessing a teacher that has plenty of possibility. I want to take anything away from them. They have plenty of possibility. You kind of wish you had them, and mainly I'm thinking like a newer teacher. They haven't been through it, but they're not fresh out of college, but they're just not getting the whole picture. And you recognize in your role that you have an influence to either improve the likelihood they stay in this career, or the possibility that if no one steps in, it's going to be a rough road. How do you find yourself navigating that? Is that your responsibility? And I want to give some context before, I will use myself. I knew as a brand new teacher that graduated at age 22 that I was not prepared to be a full-time teacher. And not until I was 26, 27 did I even unlock the layers of what was involved to the whole picture of being teaching. And, I'm still working at being good at those layers 15 years later. What do you do? Because it sounds a lot easier when we're talking about developmentally appropriate for kids, but you're working with teachers and you're just saying to yourself, oof, there's some coaching that needs to go on. My time is critical. How are you creating an action plan there?
Sure. So I think that it's that intentional questioning. It's starting with, so how do you think that lesson went? And letting them reflect, because no matter what they choose that might need work, you're bettering that teacher. So I think sometimes we need to get out of the way and stop dictating what we think needs to improve. And we need to share that ownership with our teachers, and I'll allow them to reflect and say the part of the lesson that maybe they were feeling weak on. And if they can't articulate it, we can certainly guide them there and say, well, what did you think about the independent practice? Did you feel like your students were mastering that? Like, I think we can get them to there, but I think no matter what they respond with, that's an action plan, because any improvement betters the profession. And I think it's just important that we let it come from the teacher, because they get enough from everybody else telling them what to do.
I was going to go right in the same avenue of intentional coaching, intentional questioning, like you said. And there have been times where a teacher has asked me to come in and work with them for X. And when I'm in there, I'm thinking, well, we need to do A, B, and C before we can improve X, right? And so sometimes intentional questioning gets us there. Sometimes the opportunity for me to model a lesson for the teacher to observe, they might see some of those management strategies that I'm utilizing that they are not, and that could be part of that building block that we're missing. Or some of our teachers, and we have it as a part of new teacher induction, is they film a lesson, and
Yes.
they have to watch themselves teach. I think that's one of the greatest things you can do as a teacher who's
Agreed.
been teaching for 1 year or for 33 years. It
Correct.
is so powerful to watch not only you teach, but be able to watch your students learn and see what they're actually
Absolutely.
doing. Because in the moment of teaching, there's so much that we don't pick up on. Sarah, when you were a fifth grade teacher, you were awarded State Teacher of the Year, which is an incredible honor. And I know you're
Thank
not
you.
going to sit here and say, like every other Teacher of the Year that we've had on the podcast, you don't view yourself as the best teacher in Florida, right? You just view
Correct.
yourself as someone, as a representative of all
Yes.
teachers of Florida.
Yes.
But obviously, you have to be good at teaching to win that award. So, what would you say was one or two of your greatest strengths that you had as a teacher that helped your students thrive and succeed in your room?
Absolutely. And I can answer this. So I agreed. I do not think I'm the best teacher in the state of Florida. I think I was chosen to represent the best teachers in the state of Florida, and that my platform was given an opportunity to be shared. And so I never take that lightly. And I never use the phrase, I was just doing my job. Because I used to say that in the beginning. Well, I'm just doing my job. But that belittles the work that I'm putting in. And so I wasn't just doing my job, I was changing lives. And I know we're all out there doing this work. And so every time I spoke and every time I traveled and every time I met with teachers, I remembered my colleagues that were standing to the left and the right of me. And I thought, if I don't do this and bring them with me on this, then this is all for naught. So I love that you started off with that, because that is how we feel as Teachers of the Year, that we were given a spotlight we didn't ask for. It usually starts with a nomination that we were not part of, and we just kind of go along for this journey. But I think what made me stand out was I was named the Pinellas County Teacher of the Year in 2021, and that was the year we returned from COVID. And so in that school year, I chose to be a simultaneous teacher. And so within our school building, we had one teacher on every team that was the online teacher, and everybody else was face-to-face, just the way our numbers fell. But in fifth grade, there were 5 of us teachers on that team. And we talked and we said that we did not want one of us to be the online teacher, because we felt like we were going to lose a colleague, because teaching was going to look so different for that person. And we had such a strong network already on our team that all 5 of us chose to be simultaneous. So I started with about 14 students in front of me and 8 online. And I navigated teaching in a way that I had never, ever thought I would have to do. And I think during that year, because there were no rules and we were writing the rule book, there was a little bit of freedom there, because nobody could tell me what it was supposed to look like. And so there wasn't this measuring stick that I had to measure up to. I was creating the measuring stick. And man, did that feel pretty cool. That like I could build this plane as it was flying, and nobody was giving me a blueprint to do it, but I was going to be leaving a blueprint for people behind me. And so I found that incredibly freeing and terrifying. And so while I was teaching simultaneous in the very beginning, it was around September, I was growing very frustrated with technology, dropping kids from the calls and unmute. I was doing it wrong every single time. And apparently I was groaning outwardly. And so my students were picking up on that. And so I would groan and then they would groan. And then I'd go back and find all my kids that were online and get them back in. And so a few months into the year, Isabella, who was an online student, had switched over to face-to-face learning. And she was sitting in front of us and I was doing my math lesson. And I went over to my computer to look for one of my online learners to volunteer their thinking. And all 8 had dropped from the call already at 9 o'clock in the morning. And I was like, ugh. And the whole class was like, ugh. And Isabella looked at me and she said, Ms. Painter, were you guys doing that when I was on the other side? And I chuckled for a moment, and then it was a gut punch, because what I noticed I had been doing was I had been modeling how I was focusing on things that were going wrong. And I felt very convicted in that moment, because not only had I been doing it outwardly, but I had been like kind of modeling that for my students, that instead of that growth mindset, that grit, that passion and perseverance that I was known for disappeared in 2020. And it was overshadowed by the grunts, the groans, and the frustrations. And so right there and then on that September day, my 10-year-olds in my room came up with the 2-word phrase, find joy. And so they said, how about every time something goes wrong, we'll say, find joy. and they will remind me to look for the things going right. And so Ken and Matt, find joy became my mantra, and it took over my classroom. It changed the way the rest of the year looked. It went to music, art, PE. It went home with them. And we used it every time we had a discouragement, disappointment, or even if we needed a moment to celebrate, there would be a choral response of find joy. And so I think that changed me, and it changed the way I taught, and it's changed me for the rest of my life as how I am as an educator. Because my students taught me that you don't change a negative outlook by fighting it, you change it by replacing it. And so that accountability that 10 and 11-year-olds gave to me showed me that it's how I view things that will determine how my day goes. And they embraced that. And that was the year I was recognized. And I think that's what made me stand out.
Beautiful. I think what resonates is how collectively it felt like everyone was probably dealing with that scenario in the same way, and the opportunity, right? Like you talked about how fifth graders get your sarcasm and jokes. Like in some ways, it was a bit that goes along, and then only to have that enlightening moment. I think one of the things that I struggle with right now. Yesterday, I was at a training on science, and how often do we spend trainings with other districts complaining about the amount of work that is expected of us, or how often does a keynote speaker bring up the idea that time is the most limited and expensive resource for teacher, right? We hear these same things that are just outs that avoid us from responsibility. And I was talking yesterday about how, unfortunately for us, the teacher side, we need to stop using the pandemic as a benefit to get out of the problem. The kids can still absolutely use it as a feature of why they are how they are. They are not the ones that chose it. Not that anyone did, but we as educators need to change that perspective. And I love how you had that opportunity sooner than maybe a lot of us
Sure.
caught on.
And I think that was the beautiful thing about it, because finding joy is proactive. It wasn't wait for the circumstances to get better and then be happy. It was an intentional choice and a discipline. And so when you learn that at the age of 10, I mean, those kids are thriving. They are now 8th graders. I have so many stories of students that were in that class that have completely changed how they view things, and challenges, most importantly. Obstacles and challenges are now, I get to determine how I face this, because I'm going to choose to find the joy in it. I mean, I get text messages every other month from those students saying, are you still finding joy? Or I'm finding joy in my math class right now, Miss Painter, I'm digging in. And it's like, that's what we're here for, right? Like, we are world changers, and that's how we change the world, by changing our thinking and then sending that ripple effect out into the world. I mean, it is one of the most beautiful things that ever happened to me, and it was organic. It wasn't in my lesson plan. And we got the gains that we wanted academically, but it's because we worked on our hearts first. And that's just so powerful when that happens in a classroom.
How do we avoid missing these opportunities to change the lives of students? Because we hear on this podcast, in some capacity or another, teachers having moments like this, or it's their drive, or different capacities of the relationships with students and caring for students and loving students. And we haven't had one quite like yours, and your story was special in its own right. But just this idea of how do we get educators to stop missing this and start realizing no matter what you teach, where you teach, how you teach, whether you want to lecture every day, run centers every day, run experiments every day, none of that matters in comparison to how we can change the lives of students through relationships, connections, and love. And it doesn't have to be finding joy. Every teacher should not be saying to their students to find joy, right? Because it's not going to be authentic. It's not going to be real.
So I
How
think
do
we
we
do
get
that. Yeah, we do that by elevating student voice. We get off the stage because it's not about us. And I've heard it said, whoever's doing the majority of the talking is doing the majority of the learning. So if I'm up there spending my day talking to my students and they don't have that opportunity to speak to each other or to elevate each other's voices. I teach in a largely Hispanic community. We have a very high ELL population in my county. I always have at least 50% of my students are ELL students. If I don't give them opportunity to practice that language and to practice speaking and to grow in that confidence, then all I'm doing is stifling their voice, literally and figuratively, right? So I think what we need to do is get out of the way, one, but two, know that negativity is contagious, but joy is too. And so I think we can start by influencing our colleagues by the way we live. I want to be so attractive in the way I act that people want to join my circle, right? Like, you know who to go to when you want to complain. You'll seek that person out because you know they're going to side with you and they're going to validate those feelings. But do you have a joy person? Do you have someone you can go to that you know when you're feeling those moments of joy or have those joy stories that they're going to celebrate alongside you? And if you don't, be that person on your campus to where it's contagious and those around you want to have that exact same expression of joy in their classrooms, which then trickles to home in the community.
One of the things that I keep on saying every opportunity, but I really believe, is that teaching is a privilege. And when I started using that as the basis of how I thought about things, it's my version of choosing joy. Like, I am so fortunate to have a tough day, which resulted in still growth in kids. And the hard part is, if I'm hearing this as someone that doesn't have this mantra, you have to be open to it happening organically. Like, I don't know if this would have hit you as hard or as substantially if you didn't have that student rock your world, because that's what it was. And I'm sure, as you mentioned, the gut hunt is guilt and shame and, all of those type things that take you down here so that you can rebuild so much higher.
Right, but
And
Matt, it's also reflection, right? So that gut punch, people feel it every day, but it's what you do with that gut punch. So if you're not a reflective educator, you don't go back and look and go, what can I do differently?
And I think the language that we use is so important. Matt, you said, about teaching being a privilege versus a job. That's just language, but using that language builds that mindset. I was recently reading a book, and it was about saying I get to do this instead of I have to do this. So I'm even using that with my own children. You get to clean up your toys tonight, right? Instead of you have to clean up your toys. And my son is exactly like me as a 5-year-old. And he said, well, why are you saying that? And I said, well, there are children that don't have toys to clean up. And so they don't get to clean up their toys, right? You still may look at it as something that you don't want to do, but some kids don't get to do that. And so it is that mindset. It's using yet in our language. When I would pretest with my students, there was an option of, I don't know yet, right? So they understood that it was something that they were going to learn. And those simple tweaks make create big shifts in our thinking. And I think something that we can do as educators is invest in ourselves. So a good friend of mine who we had on the podcast recently, Suzanne Daly. So she talks so much about what we can do ourselves as we prepare for the day, right? So listening to podcasts about mindset, I recommend listening to her podcast, Teach Happier. It's 5 to 8 minute episodes, a great way to start your day. But we need to invest in ourselves and allow ourselves to understand how to model good behavior and how to model positive behavior. Because just because we're teachers doesn't mean that we are great at managing stress. Doesn't mean that we are great at executing physical health. It doesn't mean that we're great at exercising mental health and being off our devices like we should be. There's a lot of things that as human beings that we are struggling with just as other people are, but we also bear the responsibility of modeling positive behavior in our classroom. And I think that's so essential for our students to see and to feel. And like you said, Matt, that's why it came out in your classroom, Sarah, because it was a community where they knew that was accepted.
Sure. Yeah, I think about like modeling mistakes and how, you hear a lot of teachers say, well, I value mistakes and we grow through our mistakes. I would always start my year by telling my students I would make at least 20 a day. And then I'm going to count them out loud as I do them. And so I tell them, if you don't do this with me, you're going to make me look like a fool. And so we got into the habit of, oh, that's number 3. And then I carried the digit in the wrong place. Oh, that's my 4th mistake. It got a little out of hand when they would do it when my administrator would walk in. They were like, that's your 6th mistake today, Miss Painter. I'm like, all right, easy now. We don't need to let everyone know. But we normalized it because how often do adults do that for children? We tell them it's okay to make mistakes, and then we get frustrated with ourselves when we make a mistake. So if we don't model what we want to see in them, they're just going to continue to hear one thing and do another.
Well, and I think using your perspective of choose joy, like we are in a beautiful phase of education. And a lot of people can sit here and say, it's a mess, there's all this, that, and the other things, the attention span. It is a beautiful phase in education where we are witnessing having to be creative and be professionals to figure out how we can best support kids. But the thing that's so beautiful, kind of like your excuse of being a simultaneous teacher, it was a little bit of the wild, wild west. In some ways, like I felt like, and I've mentioned this before in previous episodes, I felt like my educational career, I was teaching 4th grade for 9 years. And the pressure of teaching that right before the pandemic, I felt like it was going to burst naturally. Every moment was documented to be used in its to fidelity, all these different things. We hit the pandemic, and you know what? I don't care about curriculum for a big portion of my day. I care about the emotions and the feelings of kids. And I will tell you that the learning will happen. I have no doubt about it. But my kids are cared for. They have value. They have voice. They have self-worth. And
the content then just comes.
How that, yeah.
Yeah, it just flowed after that because you were taking care of their most basic needs. And also, I think you would agree with this, Matt and Ken, that I think there are so many teachers that grew the most from those 2 years, where I could not rely on how I had taught 5th grade before. And so I had gotten lazy in my career. I was in year 17, 18 at that point. I could do it with my eyes closed. But was that what was best for kids? Probably not. And so it shook me and it woke me up and it ignited a fire in me that made me want to do things completely different in every aspect. I wanted to be different, and I wanted to do things that met the needs of my students this year, not the students I had 5 years ago. And I think that was what was really beautiful about that time. Was it was like standing on a precipice and realizing I am never going back to the teacher I was before, because the things I have learned through this ordeal has changed me for the better and my profession for the better.
So I want to ask both of you, because Ken, I think the language and the perspective that you're giving is so powerful. But I want to speak in the perspective of someone who is feeling like they're going to burst. They're the aftershake of the pandemic. They gave and they gave and they gave, and they are exhausted and they are struggling, or they're saying that they're doing their best and it feels stagnant, but that's the best they can give. How would you suggest getting back to feeling the creative juices? How, when you know that you gave so much extra to survive over the last few years, and now everything's kind of seeming like it never happened. Like, Sarah, you're saying, I'm never going to go back. That's a choice you're making. I'm sure
Right.
there are plenty of educators that went right back to how they
Sure.
did it once they
Sure.
could. How do
Yeah,
you
I
speak to
think
those people and continue that?
I think that I have some very brave colleagues that have chosen to try something different within the field of education. So rather than leave, they're like, you know what? I know this is what I was created to do, but I am so tired of doing this. Let me try this. For example, I have a very good colleague. Her name is Brooke. She was our gifted teacher at Eisenhower Elementary for years. And after the pandemic, she was burned out. And so she went to teach pre-K. And so she is a pre-K teacher right now, teaching 4-year-olds. And we share a wall. So my MTSS room is right next to her pre-K classroom. That girl is in there singing songs. She is greeting them and doing these silly little things with them. They have nap time. I know all their routines because I can hear the music through my wall. But I just think that's the bravery of teaching, is when you know you are made to do it and you're feeling burned out, then pivot. Try something different. Give it a shot, because like we said at the beginning, you have the skill set. Try it doing something else, because I use the analogy, when your car runs out of gas, you don't leave it on the side of the road and go get another car, right? Like, you refill the tank. So if you like your car, refill the tank. Don't ditch it and go get another car because you felt that it ran out of gas. Ken, do you have any other perspective on that?
I love the analogy, and I hope that I'm never driving a car that I run out of gas and I actually do want to leave it on on the side of the road.
If you reach that point in life, we've got some things to look back on.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's hard for me at times because I 100% empathize with every teacher. I think the job has always been hard, and now that we are completely out of the pandemic, it's years past in the rearview mirror. The style of teaching, the restrictions on teaching are gone, and the social distancing and the virtual and all of that is completely gone and was not even last year, right? I look, is teaching harder than it was right before the pandemic? I think at that time we were inundated with more work. Our plates were becoming more full. Data analysis was a part of the job. And I'm sure there are many capacities as to why teaching is harder now than it was 5 years ago and 5 years before that. But I think as a teacher, if you are struggling with that burnout, start to reflect on your day and start to try to find ways to pay attention to what you are doing, what is consuming your time, and how much time it's consuming. And is there a way to shift that? Are you grading too much? Right? I work with so many teachers that grade everything students do. And in my opinion, I just say, whoa, like, this is not necessary. This is not creating academic gains, nor is it creating emotional gains for your students. And you're bogging down so much of your time to do that. Look at your lessons. How can you shift lessons a little bit just to have them be active a little bit more and make your day easier, so you're not leaving completely burnt out because you feel like you have to lead the entire day? Just breaking down your day, analyzing your day, and finding ways. Are there things that I can just stop doing? Are there things that I can shift in how I do it or when I do it? And and start to focus on the things that you truly think make the difference in your life and the lives of students, right? And so it's not like you can stop doing the job. Teaching is always going to be hard. Teaching is always going to be a time commitment. That is the reality of the profession. But I do think as educators, sometimes we put more on ourselves than necessary. And I'm not saying to the point where your job will become easy. Your job's not going to be easy. But take time to reflect to see, are you making it harder on yourself than you have to?
Absolutely. And I love that reflective piece. I mean, we've talked about that several times tonight, just that ability to reflect. But when you don't have that ability, have a tribe that will help you reflect, right? So I had a colleague, my coworker, Vicky, who would reflect with me on my practice. And so having that other pair of eyes to look at what I'm doing. But I also think there's this element of self-care, and I throw that out there very loosely because I think we need to give ourselves permission to have that look the way it needs to look for us. So I remember being the teacher that brought my laptop home and continued to work. And I was told that that wasn't self-care. And I decided at some point that, you know what self-care looks like for me is bringing my laptop home. It is continuing to work after dinner, and it is grading papers before I go to bed. Because if I don't do those items, I'm not taking care of myself and I'm not ready the next day. But my colleague down the hall leaves their laptop at 3:30 and walks out because that's what self-care looks like for them. So I think it's important that we give ourselves permission to work hard because for some of us that is self-care. And I know that makes me sound a little sick, but you know who you are if this resonates with you. To be told that it is okay to do it if you want to do it, not that you're being forced to do it, not that anybody's asking you to do it, but if that's how you take care of yourself, I want to be the first to give you permission to do that as well, because some of us need to hear that that's okay too. But like you said, Ken, it's reflecting on, are there parts of my job that I'm making more difficult for myself, that I feel like I don't have a choice in, that I can go back and reflect on?
And I think, I don't know why I thought about this, but it makes me think of fad dieting. Like, it's okay to go through surges where you want to work extra hard and then you have a few days or weeks off and you can go and change, and it doesn't have to be rhythmic. There is no right or wrong, and that guilt is just self-derived. And I love that word permission, and that's something that I feel like is sometimes I view myself as a classroom teacher as my own boss, and what permissions am I giving for the space that I am in control of, and sometimes I'm not, and obviously I have responsibilities. But yeah, it to be in the right mindset to go into the next day, some people can show up and feel totally fine, or some people wish they could, and their responsibilities outside of school are more demanding than they are at school, and they need to and deserve that same level of grace that we would give anyone in any other.
I think it's so important, and this is a new realization for me, is to know who you are outside of the profession and what your priorities are. And those are going to shift and those are going to change, right? My priorities now as a father of 3, almost 4, are way different than my first 5 years. My first 5 years, my priority was the students, and it was like doing everything I possibly could to make my classroom and my school different and better, creating technology clubs, creating a student news broadcast, going for grants and bringing so much into my school, being on every committee. That was who I was, right? And I wanted to grow as an educator as much as I possibly could. And now that's different. And even though I'm not in the classroom, that has shifted over time for me. And as a coach, I've been very deliberate of, and coaching allows you to do this a little bit more because you have a little bit less of that emotional pull of having students and having parents that rely on you every day. I was closing my laptop when I go home, and I was either writing down what I needed to do before the next day, and knowing, okay, I can do that at 9 o'clock at night after I've had all of my dad time and all of my husband time, or closing it knowing I will open this tomorrow at 7 a.m. when I show up to work, right? And now moving into this interim elementary principal position, that has been a rude awakening of maintaining that bubble. And I feel so much more of that emotional pull because I'm communicating with parents. I have teachers that are relying on me. I have students that are relying on me. I am receiving hundreds of more emails in much different capacity. I'm getting bus reports, and I'm getting hit in so many different angles that I wasn't prepared for. And I very quickly felt myself losing control of my self-image and of my time, my anxiety, my all of those pieces. But because I had systems in place, because I knew who I wanted to be outside of the role, I was very easily and quickly able to reel that back in, right? I now know I do not look at email after I get home until my kids are in bed, because almost every day I get some sort of student incident report, bus report, a parent contacting me about something that happened that day that's going to eat at me emotionally when I'm supposed to be paying attention to my kids. And so knowing who you are and what your priorities are can allow you to start to figure that out. And maybe part of that is, like you said, Sarah, giving yourself permission to be the teacher that is just hitting the grindstone every day and being that one in the building that your teachers and your students need.
Yeah, and I think it depends, and especially when you talk about being a parent and being an educator. I have 6 children, and I think it depends on their age too, because as my children got a little bit older, I saw my service to my students as a way to parent my children. So they saw me serving my families. They were in the car with me when I would go drop off supplies. They were in my classroom after school when I stayed and didn't get paid, but worked with children to get them caught up in their studies. So, like, to me, it was another layer of my parenting to show my children what it looked like to be in a field that serves others. And I think we can view it like that with a delicate balance, as long as it's not at the detriment of my family not being served, right? So that's that pivotal piece there is, am I serving others and then not serving at home? And I think that accountability of either a spouse or a partner or somebody who can call you out on it and say, hey, you've been checked out, you're checking email at the dinner table, right? And so, like, setting those boundaries for yourself. But for me, I need someone to tell me, because I will put the pedal to the floor and continue until I am completely exhausted. So I just need to have those people that I surround myself with, and I know who they are, that will tell me, and I will respect it when it comes from them, because I know it's coming from a place of love.
So I know we are running towards the end of our episode.
Yeah, I was just going to say, normally I try to pay attention to our time, but we've had some recording issues tonight, so I have no idea how long we've been recording right now.
one of the things that I wanted to mention is the MTSS side of things before we wrap up the conversation, because I think it actually ties perfectly with what you just said. MTSS, and you can define it probably much more eloquently than I could, but
you would think.
Well, yeah. As a former special ed teacher, and learning support teacher, I was the end placement for students that were identified to have challenges with learning. And prior to MTSS, there was a lot of teacher input that led to a kid getting evaluated. I have these concerns. Can you check them out? And through the years, programs like RTII really infiltrated our school district to support kids, but we realized that there were multi-tiers of supports needed that would eventually catch many of the students before they would have a qualification. How do you feel like you partner that responsibility? Because in my opinion, I could absolutely see yourself priorities being eroded away because you are trying to catch collectively the students that are, in some reason, not teacher fault, floundering, and try to put the puzzle pieces together before, not that it's a problem to be evaluated and diagnosed, but based off least restrictive environment, the ideal goal is to keep as many kids on their grade level path as possible. So how do you manage or define or structure or even view the MTSS process and the responsibilities of possibly 7 grade levels and oh so many kids? What does a day in the life look like when you are looking through that lens?
Sure. So it usually starts at the teacher level, right? So a teacher may have a concern with a student, and so they fill out a referral form that goes to our student services team. That consists of our school psychologist, myself, our reading interventionist, sometimes our school counselor, our social worker, and any administrator then that's on that team as well. And so we couple that with the data. So we don't just look at data. We don't just hear from the teacher. But we take both of those and we lay them side by side, and then we have a conversation. We have the teacher come in and we have them bring as much data as they can to paint us a picture for this student. And so we look at it, and our primary goal, Matt, is to find that gap and to find what they're missing. Our primary goal is not to place them in special education. The goal is to see, what is this student missing and what can we do to fill that need so that that gap decreases. The other thing that I think has become my focus over the last 2 years, which is ironic, being that I was an intermediate teacher, is I'm pouring all of my resources into K1. And I tell my colleagues in 5th grade, you'll thank me in a few years, I promise. You know, they're like, Sarah, you're giving all of our hourly teachers down in kindergarten. What about us? And I said, well, if I can fill the gaps while they're like this, then when they come to you, we don't have them like this anymore. And so that whole idea of that if a student is not reading on grade level by grade 3 and that their chances of dropping out increases dramatically, well, then we've got to fix the problem before grade 3, right? Like, it just seems like a no-brainer, yet we continue to send these kids on with these incredibly large learning gaps. And we expect these 4th and 5th grade teachers to be miracle workers and not only get them to have a learning gain, but to make them proficient when they're 3-4 grade levels below already proficiency. And so I think knowing that, like I said, the MTSS goal is to find out what that student needs, and that's through trial and error. So we'll choose an intervention based on what the data tells us. We'll try it for 6 weeks. And if after 6 weeks we're not seeing that gap begin to close in a rate that's equal to their peers, then we're going to go, you know what? Let's try a different intervention, because 6 weeks is about that sweet spot where we should start to see that. And that's what we do. So that's how we handle it in our county. We try it and we keep going. And when we start to see that gap decreasing, we don't take those supports away. We continue them and we continue to monitor. It's the same thing you do in the classroom. You monitor, you give feedback, you track progress, and you include the student in that conversation. So I hope you heard that. We include the student in the tracking of that data, because how do I get a year's gain out of a student who has no idea where they are when they come to me and no idea where I want them to be if they're not part of that partnership in tracking their own progress? So I hope that answered your question, Matt.
Well, and I think what we hear throughout the entire conversation is their investment and motivation right there, if they know where they're at and where they're aiming to be, and not in a punitive, hey, you're behind, but just some responsibility of it. We can set goals, we can set measurable items, because I think that the growth of that role, you in that position is just a savior for so many classroom teachers. And I will speak and say 2 of the best educators in my building couldn't be in a better position for the health of our school, because they are our MTSS coordinators that just keep us afloat. When I say I've tried X, Y, and Z, I've devoted as much time as I can they bail me out and make me look good at the end of the year. So, very, very grateful for those people in our buildings.
What advice would you give to a teacher who doesn't have maybe that layer of support in their building? You can pick a specific grade level and how they can maybe modify the way they deliver instruction or structure their classroom to target and help students, one, find students, and two, help those students succeed a little bit more.
Sure. So I would say to leverage their colleagues, especially those on their team, because most schools have like a common schedule. So, like, for example, I'll just pick on our second grade team. They have the same planning time. And so they also have the same ELA time, the same math time, the same science time. So if we look across the grade level and we see every student in that grade level as mine, not just the ones on my roster, but every student in second grade is mine, then I'm looking to see maybe there's a student in my class that needs something that this teacher over here can give because she's got 4 students like that as well. So sharing the responsibility of that learning across the grade level and then across the school. We've done that school-wide as well. We used to have a walk to intervention where the entire school stopped at one point and all of our kids shifted to the room that had the intervention that that kid needed. And just the way that that impacted our data and what that looked like for our school was absolutely incredible. And then you think about how it strengthens the bonds between teachers, because now you're building trust with somebody to take your kids and your name's attached to them at the end of the day, but you're trusting a colleague to give that kid what they need, and they are trusting you to do the same. So you think about the culture and climate that created at a school when you have that amount of trust.
I love that. So I want to transition into our exit ticket, which are the same 4 questions we ask every guest every week. Question number 1, what is the best thing you can do to make a student's school experience better?
The best thing you can do to make a student's school experience better is to form an alliance with their parents and their caregivers. If I do not do that first and foremost, I fail every single time. And so I think reaching out to them even before the first day of school, sharing your contact information and loading them up on that asset-based approach rather than deficit-based, like telling them how wonderful their child is at X, Y, and Z, and letting that child become the expert at something in your class that they are known for, giving them notoriety for being great and excellent in some field in your classroom goes a long way. But letting the parents know as well. I have found, and it took a while for me to get there, but just truly, we say it takes a village. So engaging that village, including them in that data analysis, in the goal setting, in the growth mindset, using that common language with your parents, I think that is the game changer.
I can't echo that enough.
Well, I was going to say, Ken, I mean, you said that not nearly as nice and succinct as you did, Sarah.
Yeah, we've talked about that in many capacities, but that was one of the best ways to put it by far.
So a fun one, and take this in any direction. If you want to take this as a gut punch, feel free to take this as a gut punch. But
I'm ready, Matt.
What is the best piece of advice you received? And it could have come from a colleague, a supervisor, or maybe in your case, even a student.
Best advice I would say is to seize opportunities to lead. I was a baby teacher the first time a principal asked me to lead a staff meeting. But because she asked me, she called it a golden opportunity. She knew how to catch me. You don't want to turn down gold. I think any opportunity we have to lead in our field is an opportunity to shine a light on what we are doing. Because one of the grumblings is when you do have someone coming in to speak to you that you don't feel like understands. But when you start to leverage the expertise in your building and you give those people a voice and an opportunity to share what they're doing and the smart work that's happening just right there in your building, something changes in the atmosphere. So I think the best advice I've ever been given is to say yes to as many things as possible to pave the way for the people behind me, to make sure, because every time I say no, it closes a door for maybe a teacher that could be behind me wanting to do that opportunity next. So saying yes to keep those doors open for my colleagues.
Speaking of gold, you are just delivering gold answer after answer. The next one is that the school year goes in waves. There are some great times that you're, as the kids would say, you're vibing. You're feeling good. Everything's going well. There are times that we struggle to survive. What's a message you could pass on to educators to help them power up through those moments of struggle?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it'd be to find joy, but also to know that there are seasons in life, and there are seasons in teaching, and there are seasons in parenting. And so I think it's just knowing that this too shall pass, that the hard that I'm experiencing today will not be the hard that I'm experiencing tomorrow. So surrounding yourself with a tribe, a group of colleagues that you can rely on for those moments to vent and commiserate and complain, but also for asking, now what? Right? So staying in control and knowing that if I don't take those next steps and I live there, then that's toxic and unproductive. So knowing that it's a season, but I get to choose when I get out of that season.
Fantastic. It's easy to fall into facilitating a repetitive classroom. What do you think separates the teachers who are the ones constantly seeking to change, innovate, and adopt new teaching strategies?
Sure, it's that reflective piece. It's having the ability to look back on your lesson, your words, your work, your student outcome data, and say, what story is this telling about me? And do I like it? And if I don't like it, am I brave enough to change the narrative? Am I brave enough to take a risk and do something about it, to go from victim to victor, right? Like to decide that I'm not going to let this be my story, and I get to choose what that's going to look like. So that entire reflective piece, which is really, really hard to do because there's a lot of vulnerability there. So you have to build a lot of trust with your colleagues, but with yourself as well, and trust that you're going to be okay in the end, right? And that I think when I'm growing through something or trying something new, I always told my students, I'm trying this new thing in math today, guys. It might not go well, but I want you to know I'm trying this. And so I had my students hold me accountable, because who do I spend the most time with, right? Those 10 and 11-year-olds, those are my kiddos. And so I think just kind of putting it out there and verbalizing it and having accountability and reflecting back on it, those are the things that are going to make you continue to show up.
So I would usually say this after you signed off and included into our intro, but it has really been a privilege to get to talk with you over the past hour. I think what we hear in a lot of these conversations, and we are just so lucky to converse with great educators, is you shared truth and honesty and great strategies in a beautiful way that makes it feel obtainable. And I think that is what we all need to hear, is that get back to the basics, get back to the feels, get back to what brings joy. So I know for myself, by all means, I have very much appreciated your time. How can our audience continue to connect with you and learn with and from you going forward?
Sure. So we just started a podcast in Pinellas County called Finding Joy Through Education. And so you can find us on Amazon and on Spotify and on YouTube. We have one episode out. The second episode, I just got a text from the producer, is going to be launched tomorrow. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to shine a spotlight on the different aspects of education that bring us joy. So our first episode was just kind of like joy in general. But our second episode was finding joy through the arts. And so I reached out to my colleagues from across the world, my state teachers of the year, my district teachers of the year here in Florida, and teachers right here in classrooms in Pinellas County. And I asked them to share how the arts bring joy to education. And then episode 3, which we're recording in a few weeks, is finding joy through student experience and student engagement. So just finding those little niches of opportunities for teachers to share their expertise. I just think it's so important in a time like this. Like you said, Matt, this is a beautiful time in education, but you wouldn't know it if all you did was read headlines. And so if we don't create opportunities to highlight joy and the good things that are happening, because they are happening everywhere, then we're not going to hear about them. So I think it's a beautiful way to be intentional and to hear. So you can certainly look for that podcast on Spotify, Amazon, and on YouTube, called Finding Joy in Education.
Thank you, Sarah. We'll be sure to link directly to your podcast in our show notes here, so our listeners can find that and tune into that. And I look forward to checking that out myself as well. So to echo what Matt said, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I'm very grateful for the opportunity that we had to talk to you. And I think there's a lot of value in what we talked about here and what we heard from you, and how we can find joy in our profession, find joy tomorrow, look at the way that we're interacting with students, and look at the way that we're interacting with our colleagues to present the best version of ourselves in front of our students every day. So thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you both. I think that's exactly what you're doing. You're providing a platform for just the positivity that is so needed. And I think that's what I love so much about your podcast. Is every single one is asset based. Every single one is leveraging the good that we are doing. And gosh, we need to hear that. So thank you, Matt and Ken, for giving this space and creating this opportunity for teachers to hear those good things that we're doing across our nation.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. And Matt, why don't you take us on out of here?
Yes, as we power down this episode, I would say we're feeling a little powered up right now. So really appreciate the time, and we look forward to another great conversation this time next week. We'll talk to you then.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to or watching us on YouTube. Each week we get to talk to amazing educators who are making a positive impact on the lives of students, their colleagues, administrators, and education as a whole. It's been such a privilege every week to be able to talk to these incredible individuals, learn from them, grow with them, and better myself and all of education through these conversations. If you haven't already, please consider sharing this with a colleague, someone who can benefit and be powered up from the experience of listening to these incredible conversations. Because of Powered Up, we are powering education by empowering you.